This is episode 1 of Integrative Consciousness. Today, we'll be interviewing Nathanael de Boer, the creative director at Psychedelic Water. Okay, so Nathanael, what was the idea behind Psychedelic Water and what is its goal now?
Right. Yeah. So I haven't always been with the company. I joined a little over a year ago. I sort of came on in a graphic design role. I was just kind of helping out with some content creation, a little bit of packaging design and that sort of thing. But then slowly have ingrained myself more and more into it, into the kind of like full-time role that I'm in now, managing a lot of our creative and whatnot. But I'll kind of try to give a bit of the story pre-me and kind of up to now. So our founder, Keith, he had previous experience in the cannabis industry, and around 2019, he started to begin hearing the rumblings of sort of something new happening, like very similar to when cannabis legalization started to happen. Those things started to be coming out. He was noticing those same sort of things happening with psychedelics, and at the same time, he was looking for a new project and decided that it might as well be this. So over the next 2 years or so, the product slowly took shape. The team grew a little bit. They spent a few months working with a food scientist out of NYU, and then finally, February of 2021 came, and we launched. So as for the goal of what we're trying to do, we've been trying to create a product that's really highly accessible, makes people feel good, and emulates some of the effects of traditional psychedelics using ingredients that are legal today, right? Because obviously, like, traditional psychedelics still aren't legal. So the big challenge was, how can we create something for this market, get in early, and kind of fill this niche before these substances actually become publicly available. And again, we sort of looked to cannabis for a little bit of inspiration here. If you look at the trajectory of cannabis legalization, especially in the United States, something that was really instrumental to sort of, at least as far as consumer mindsets are concerned, something that was instrumental to sort of like changing the general narrative around cannabis products was the emergence of CBD products. Basically this thing that's like, hey, we're not cannabis, but we're like cannabis, and we're going to really talk a lot about the positive effects of this thing and not necessarily emphasize the sort of recreational use so much as the medicinal aspects of it. So we're trying to do a similar thing with psychedelics, except that obviously there is sort of some stuff that's different, right? With psychedelics, the problem is less sort of like, there's these negative associations, but the negative associations are a little different. Like, there's a lot of fear around, like, people just being like worried about what tripping is like, not liking that idea of not being in control, not liking the idea of like hallucinating and all that sort of stuff. And that's really what I think in a lot of people's minds, psychedelics are like. That's the start and end of it. So we're trying to offer something that sort of is accessible to people broadly and sort of moves the conversation away from that. So in that way, we're not really here for the existing psychedelic community in a lot of ways. So we love those people, and a lot of them dig what we're doing anyway. But they don't need to be convinced of the value of psychedelics, right? They're already plugged into all the sort of research that's coming out. They're really involved in that. We're trying to reach an audience that is maybe like interested in psychedelics, wants to learn more, or has fears around psychedelics, and trying to change those fears, basically. And we think that sort of providing a product that is branded as psychedelic and having that show up in a corner store between like a can of Red Bull and a can of Coke or whatever is a really big sort of thing to sort of be like, oh, okay, this isn't as scary and back alley and weird as I potentially thought it was. So yeah, that's kind of like the idea, and then of course there is sort of like the other aspect of just being here for folks who want to sip on something that tastes good, makes them feel good, is better for you than alcohol, and won't have you, texting your ex or waking up with a hangover. So
it sounds like a great product already if I'm not texting my ex. But, so it sounds like it's really meant to open up the conversation and kind of widen people's eyes to the idea that psychedelics aren't those things that you should be afraid of per se. And from that, kind of normalizing the idea of psychedelics, even though it's not necessarily the hard psychedelics that we think of when we think of like shrooms or LSD, but instead something that's an alternative to alcohol and still gets you to, you know, feel good, relaxed, and I guess without as many negative effects afterwards. Is that the case?
Yeah, yeah. I mean,
yeah.
Like normalization, use the word normalization. And I think that's like a really big kind of key to what we're doing, is sort of, moving this thing away from being something that has this sort of like historical association to something that people reframe as being something that can be a regular part of your life, doesn't really mean anything about you. And I mean, also just opening people's eyes up to the multitude of mental health, physical health, and other benefits that these substances could have, were if they were allowed in a more broad sense. So that's what we're really trying to do.
To normalize it. It sounds like when you mention it in like a corner store where it's in between the Red Bull and another can of soda, like that really changes your mind about how you might perceive things. I remember first seeing like Red Bull cans and thinking like, oh, now Red Bull's like a normal thing. Drinking all this caffeine is a normal thing. So I guess, I think through that, it'll have the same effect and kind of guide regular consumers who weren't already interested in psychedelics into thinking and considering their applications in things like mental health and physical health as well. So I guess the next question I have to ask then is like, what is in psychedelic water exactly?
Yeah, for sure. I guess that is the big question of like, okay, so how does this thing actually work and what is it? Yes. So there are three key ingredients in psychedelic water. Those are kava, damiana, and green tea leaf. So kava is the star of the show, really. Kava is a plant that's indigenous to the South Pacific. It's quite a common drink there, actually. And traditionally what you do is you would take the root of the kava plant, grind it up into this super fine powder, put it into a cloth bag or pouch, and then like knead it in water for like 10 to 15 minutes. And then what you're left with is this sort of like murky brown liquid. It is very bitter and very earthy, and a lot of people don't really like the taste. But it does make you feel really nice. Generally, when I drink kava, I like to do it as a shot because it's a bit intense. But yeah, pretty quickly after you consume it, you'll start to notice the effects. The first thing that people tend to feel is like a tingling sensation on the tongue, which if you don't know that's going to happen can be kind of weird, but is totally like to be expected and not bad. So there's a sort of like subtle tingling feeling, and then you'll start to feel the other effects, which first off, people tend to feel really physically relaxed. If you're someone who has like a lot of aches and pains or things like that, you'll really feel those things kind of subside into the background. And then secondly, people find it really improves their mood. So people have described themselves as feeling giggly or bubbly or just like more content, like that sort of like state of being kind of like, I feel good, and not just in a physical way, but also mentally. I feel like happy, good, content. And yeah, it gets you feeling good, puts a smile on your face, but it keeps your cognition intact, which I think is another like really key thing here, is that unlike things like alcohol or cannabis, which don't, your mental clarity stays there, which is great. So that's kava. The other two active ingredients are damiana and green tea leaf, and they act in a complementary and a balancing role. So damiana is an herb. It's historically used to combat anxiety, as well as it also has a history as an aphrodisiac. So again, it's something that gets you feeling good. So it really complements the kava. And then we have the green tea, which is a natural source of caffeine. Some people find that kava like makes them sleepy. And we don't want that. We don't want this to be like a nighttime drink. We want it to be something that people can drink during the day or in social environments. So we have added that green tea leaf extract, which just gives a little bit of naturally derived caffeine that offsets those sort of like sleepiness effects that some people feel, and kind of contributes to that overall feeling of liftedness that you get from psychedelic water.
Okay, so those three ingredients then really fit into the goal of what you mentioned earlier of making it normalized to drink psychedelic substances. They aren't the typical shrooms or LSD, but instead they have these tingly feelings and enlightenment of mood. So would you say that that kind of is in line with the goal of psychedelic water to, and especially with those ingredients, really normalizes the use?
Yeah, totally. I mean, something that we've gotten as a question in the past is like, um, how do you consider this psychedelic? It doesn't contain any psychedelic drugs. And I think that, if you define a psychedelic purely as a substance that, smashes your 5-HT2A receptors, then yeah, it's not a psychedelic. But that's the definition of psychedelic drugs. That definition doesn't really work as well for, psychedelic art or psychedelic music, which I think those things are defined as psychedelic because they're inspired by psychedelic drugs. And under that definition, I think we fully are a psychedelic, right? Or we fully are psychedelic, you know what I mean? Yeah, as you said, like there's that overarching goal of sort of like bringing this sort of traditionally sort of feared or misunderstood category into the public, reintroducing it in a way that is sort of accessible to a very broad audience, and is understood as being a beneficial, safe, and enjoyable thing, and not as a sort of like out there crazy thing. So with that goal in mind, yeah, we've created this thing that has subtle effects, which, I mean, I would say personally, the effect that I feel consuming like a can or two of psychedelic water is similar to the way that I feel after ingesting psilocybin, say like 5 minutes in, right? So prior to seeing any of those visuals and whatnot, when I'm just sort of like feeling nice, like it's just kind of like that initial wave of like good vibes is hitting me, that's very similar to the feeling that I feel drinking a couple cans of psychedelic water. Now, drinking psychedelic water, that feeling is all you ever hit, and it lasts for a lot longer. Whereas like feeling that feeling after consuming psilocybin is like, I'm going to feel this for a couple minutes and then it's going to evolve into a whole other thing. But yeah, I think we have done a good job of capturing sort of something that reflects the experience of traditional psychedelics in a milder, more accessible way.
Yeah. And it also integrates the, typical ingredients like tea, having a tea leaf, and also as a act of balancing. So I'll get to that point later, but I think with the tea, for people who are already kind of against the idea of coffee and the caffeine in coffee and looking at tea as an alternative, it also works as a way to normalize all the other ingredients that are also implemented in psychedelic water.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, I think that in terms of that accessibility, like presentation was a huge aspect of it. Like there are other like psychedelic adjacent products on the market, but a lot of them tend to focus or tend to be a lot more, they tend to be oriented a lot more medically. Like a lot of them are in either like consumable gummy or consumable pill form, which I think to most people doesn't come off as something that's like, a regular, like everyday sort of, well, maybe it does come off as a regular everyday thing, but more it comes off as sort of like a medical thing, like a vitamin, effectively like a vitamin. Whereas our thing is presented a lot more as something that's like fun, can be used in a social environment. One of our biggest sort of markets is people who are sober, either, because they just don't like alcohol for whatever given reason, right? And they're looking for an alternative that they can consume intact that doesn't have the same negative health effects as alcohol. And yeah, that's why we positioned our product as something that sort of can fulfill that need, rather than it being positioned as something that's specifically for sort of like these very specific like health benefits or whatever. So yeah,
so it's a shift away from all those more medicinal looking products, so like you said, gummies and maybe like capsules. So there are a lot of those that I'm seeing as well. And so you mentioned how this product is more targeted for social events and people who are actually trying to refrain from consuming alcohol. How else beyond just social events do you see psychedelic water meshing into, the modern workflow? So working from home now, things have changed. So how do you think that will be integrated into how we work?
Yeah, so that's actually like the big second, like I would say that like our largest contingent of consumers, especially like repeat consumers, people who really like have bought into the brand heavily, is amongst that sort of sober curious movement and people who have chosen not to consume alcohol and are looking for alternatives. But a strong secondary one is people who find that those sort of mood boosting effects without an alteration to cognition are excellent if you work some sort of desk job, basically, you know, whether you're someone like me who does a lot of graphic design or things like that, or someone who's a programmer or a coder or whatever, something that like it just gives you that subtle lift, puts you in that good headspace. So, you know, the sort of pressures of the job are taken off a little bit, and you're able to kind of just enjoy the work you do. So I think it meshes in quite nicely with that sort of thing. And that's definitely like you know, we do get like tons of like fan photos sent to us via Instagram, and a big portion of them are people who are drinking them with their friends in like you know, around the pool or by the fire or whatever. But then the secondary contingent we get, the ones that get sent at 10 a.m. instead of, you know, 7 p.m. or whatever, are people who are drinking it, looking at, like, I've seen everything from like stock graphs to they're in the music studio to they're like a bunch of different things like that. So yeah, it definitely meshes in well, and there's certainly like a sort of place for that, the same way that, like, I mean, you mentioned Red Bull and the sort of like the growth of energy drinks and whatnot. And I think those have become really associated with certain specific certain jobs. But broadly, I think a lot of people, you know, it's like, oh man, I'm on that grind. I gotta work late tonight. I'm grabbing a Red Bull from the convenience store and then I'm back in the office or whatever. I mean, yeah, we're all working from home now, so the office being some corner of your house. But but I mean, I certainly have done that for years, and I think that psychedelic water is offering a good alternative to that, that doesn't have the crash, that doesn't give you the jitters, because the amount of caffeine that's in it is very small, but still gives you a sort of a different kind of boost that really helps with kind of getting into that good headspace to do good work. Yeah.
So it really fits into a niche of people who aren't looking for that crazy rush and experience of alcohol and high amounts of caffeine, and instead looking for something that just boosts your mood, you know, whether you're working or whether you're just out socializing after work. It seems to fit in both cases.
Yeah.
So my next question would be then, how do you expect, or what's the expected time horizon for psychedelic water? So it's been on the market since 2019.
So we started working on it in 2019. We launched in 2021. So we've been on the market for a little over a year and close to a year and a half, I guess.
So moving forward, are you hoping to see this like in the same suit as Red Bulls, where you can find them at any convenience store, or is it something you just want to have targeted in maybe grocery stores or higher end food stores?
I mean, I would love to see it in every convenience store. That'd be amazing. I mean, I think that is more than anything an indicator that we have achieved the goal of sort of normalizing this in sort of a broad cultural sense. Just to talk to where we are now. So when we launched, we were only available through our website. Shortly after launching, we unexpectedly went viral on TikTok. We didn't even have a TikTok account at the time, but the people had picked up our product, and it sort of became one of these, like, you know, TikTok when you buy it kind of things, early summer of 2021. So we ended up selling out what we had thought would be like at least 3 months worth of product in like 2 weeks on TikTok. And then, yeah, that was kind of the first sort of like sign of like, okay, there is a desire for this product, right? So at that time, we were only available on our website. Since then, we've expanded to being available through some other e-commerce platforms. Amazon, obviously, we're also available through Walmart.com, and then a bunch of other smaller ones. And then in the late fall, winter timeframe of 2021, we expanded to retail. So our initial launch was in LA. We launched in a bunch of independent stores in LA. yeah, some health food stores, some gas stations. We were basically just testing out to see where things would work and where they wouldn't. Shortly thereafter, we launched in Erewhon, which is an upscale grocery chain in LA. But we really made LA our base for a little while. The launch in Erewhon was super successful. From there, we ended up launching in Foxtrot, which is kind of a premium convenience chain that's all over the US. And then the big one came in February of this year, right around when we were kind of celebrating our 1 year, which is we launched in Urban Outfitters, which is sort of an unexpected partnership in that Urban Outfitters is a clothing and homewares retailer, not really something you'd associate with a consumable, but it's something that they're sort of exploring. And from a brand perspective, it made total sense. And that's been really successful as well. And yeah, I think, we're on the trajectory to keep growing in retail. We should be in 500 stores in the next couple months around the US. There's a few states missing, but we're almost in at least 1 or 2 store in every single state. We're mostly based out of LA and New York still, but we've got a store in Hawaii, which I think is super cool. The Urban Outfitters location there carries us, and also Puerto Rico, the Urban Outfitters location there carries us. So we're pretty much from coast to coast, and then a few of these other sort of islands as well. So that's fantastic to see. And yeah, like, what's the long-term goal? Yeah, I would love to see it be everywhere. I would love to see it become something that's on the same level as a Red Bull or something like that, where it's sort of ubiquitous. Everyone knows what it is. And the other big part of that, obviously, is expanding outside of the borders of the US. That's something that we haven't done yet, and we'd love to do. We're figuring out what it looks like. We're figuring out what the timeline is. Obviously, like, I'm based out of Canada. Some of our team is based out of Canada. So that's a big one, is getting it up here. We sort of, as a result of all of our friends and family and whatnot, have a built-in audience here already who's, every time I see some of my friends, it's like, when's it coming? When's it coming? So that's something we'd love to see happen. And then on social media, again, we get people reaching out from Brazil, the UK, Australia, all the time of like, when can I get this here? Can I get it shipped? It's on Amazon, but I can't get it shipped to me, like, that sort of thing. So we'd love to bring it internationally as soon as possible. So, and I don't know what that all looks like. I don't have an extreme level of insight into that, but I know it's something we're working on. So
it sounds like it sounds like it's moving from coast to coast already down in the States, and then slowly and surely internationally, because there's a lot of online demand from places like Brazil. Yeah, I'm surprised. But TikTok is crazy for making things explode overnight. So it blew.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah, it blew your 3-month supply in 2 weeks. That's huge.
Yeah. So that was great to see right off the bat, fledgling company right out the gate to have that kind of happen to us. It was really sort of a stake in the ground of like, okay, we're doing something here, something that there is this demand for, this sort of like people that clearly see the value of it and clearly want it. So that was great. Yeah.
Man, that's massive. So 3-month supply in 2 weeks, that's really quick. And especially like just starting out and seeing that sale go off, it must have been a huge motivational push to continue growing. But you did mention a couple of things related to cannabis and how this product is kind of a parallel to CBD oils in regards to the legalization of marijuana. And you mentioned its effects as well. So how do these ingredients affect you in a way that, say, CBD doesn't? So you mentioned the tingling, but you also mentioned that it's similar in terms of body aches and pains. What are a couple other ways that it affects you? So kava root extract and damiana.
Yeah. So as I kind of went over when I was going through the ingredients there's sort of like this twofold thing that you'll experience drinking psychedelic water. One is a sort of relaxation of the body, which, if you're a person who has aches and pains, could take the form of those things kind of retreating into the background and whatnot. If that's not something you struggle with, props. But also like you'll still feel that relaxation, right? That sort of like mental and physical sort of sense of like what's a good way to kind of a good thing to kind of compare it to. Okay, say you got like an extremely good sleep. You woke up, it's a weekend, and you're somewhere you really would like to be, like, I don't know, say you're up at like a cottage by a lake or something like that. You get out of bed, you feel good, you get it onto the dock, and you're just chilling, you know, like that is sort of like the place that it puts you in. And that is a result of that like twofold sort of experience of both the relaxation of the body and the elevation of the mind, right? So it's this combination of sort of taking away any sort of negative feelings in the body, but also putting you in a mental state that is inherently sort of positive and hopeful and good, you know. So that's kind of the effect. And then yeah, obviously there's the physical sensation of the tingling of the tongue, but that's basically just a byproduct of kava. That's not like I wouldn't call that like a selling point, really. It's more those other things of that sort of like just putting you in a place where you feel good, like in the most broad sense of the word.
So the biggest difference, it sounds like, is that it has a mental benefit, contrary to that of CBD, where CBD is just that kind of physical sensation. Maybe the pain just goes away. But yeah, if that pain is a mental pain, it doesn't really alleviate that.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, I think that like, yeah, CBD has very like tactical use, you know what I mean? It's like I want to target this specific issue, and there's different kinds of CBD products that are designed to target different sort of aches and pains or things like that. Whereas ours offers this mental stimulation without inebriation. Oh, that a little rhyme, but that I think is unique to kava, because other forms of mental stimulation, whether that be alcohol or cannabis, come with these other side effects that you don't necessarily want to experience. And our product does not have that same sort of effect on your cognition. Your mental clarity remains intact. And I think that's sort of what differentiates us from cannabis products and from CBD products, is you get that 1-2 punch of the physical and the mental, but without the sort of like any sort of haziness or inebriation.
It sounds like it alleviates the drowsiness, the hangover of all of things like cannabis, THC, and then alcohol. So it really sounds like something that, you know, you can just drink whenever you want to have one of these drinks and not experience, you know, a fallback afterwards, or having to recuperate the day after just because you decided to have one too many.
Yeah, no, that's a super good, like a super important point of it too, is like the no hangover, the no crash kind of aspect of it. You're not going to wake up with a hangover. You're not going to like have a come down or anything like that. It just, you know, you feel the way you do for a few hours, that feeling fades off gradually, and then you're back to sort of your normal state. Yeah.
Okay. So going back into the history books, you know, pre-pandemic, when we actually lived regular lives and we saw people, how do you think the pandemic has now influenced our kind of idea of psychedelics as a whole? So when we refer to psychedelics as a whole, we can talk about the psychedelic art that you were referring to earlier, or the psychedelic music. How do you think the pandemic has shifted that or changed how we see those things?
Yeah, I mean, insofar as like public perception of psychedelics, like as a category of substances, I don't know if it's the pandemic per se that has shifted the perception of those substances. More so, or I think more what has caused that shift is the fact that a lot of stuff has happened in the last 2 years, sort of, in alignment with all this whole COVID situation, and maybe, you know, as a result of COVID, more eyeballs have been on that. And so maybe there's been some benefit there, but a lot of these sort of early steps to change laws around this, and a lot of the most recent and impactful research around psychedelics has come out in the last 2 years, sort of not because of the pandemic, but just in congruence with the pandemic. So I think that, you know, if the pandemic hadn't happened, I think that this shift that we're experiencing would still be happening to a degree. Although, yeah, maybe to a lesser degree, because by virtue of being trapped inside, I think a lot of people spent a lot more time online, looking around at different news and things like that. And I'm sure there's a portion of people who had no real interest in psychedelics prior to the pandemic, who, as a result of being trapped inside, reading things online, ended up kind of going down the rabbit hole of all the information that's there, and have since become people who are following along with this movement. But I think the main sort of thing is just that, like, things are starting to happen, and like, COVID notwithstanding, I think that's been really what's contributed to the sort of sea change and shift in a lot of people's perceptions of these substances.
And how about in regards to, psychedelic artwork and psychedelic music in that? How do you think those have been affected by the pandemic? Do you think those have been affected by the pandemic at all? Or?
I don't know if they've been affected by the pandemic or not. As a person who like does a lot of creative work and that sort of thing, it's always something that I'm interested in. And I think on the topic of psychedelic art, what I think is really noticeable, and I have noticed this change sort of occur over the pandemic, but I'm not really sure if it's as a direct result or not, is I've seen like a significant sort of evolution in what psychedelic art looks like. Like, I think there's sort of a specific mental image that comes to mind when you think of psychedelic art, whether it be like kaleidoscopic, brightly colored visuals, or things like that. But I think that there's sort of this, with this reinvigorated interest in psychedelics, there's this new crop of artists who are creating psychedelic art that feels different and feels modern. Which has been really, really cool to see. And that's something that I draw a lot of like inspiration from with the work that I do for Psychedelic Water, is what these sort of like modern psychedelic artists are doing. There's some that, their designs, I think, are based around sort of historic, like hippie culture art and things like that. But then there's this other way of which has really tied sort of psychedelic culture to broader like mental health and wellness culture, and created this sort of like subsect of art that is very focused on sort of like intentionality and meditation and these sort of concepts, and expressing like sort of affirming those concepts through art, but does still have this very psychedelic bend to it. And that's been really cool to see that sort of art form not get stuck in the weeds, but to continually modernize and evolve. So that's been cool, at least from a visual art perspective. I can't speak to psychedelic music as much. Personally, I'm a big like punk and metal guy, so I don't pay as much attention to that stuff. I like it, but it's not something that like I'm super following along with. I
do recognize the kind of rebranding and like resurgence of hippie design, kind of bringing back the 80s and bright colors and psychedelic themed artwork. But I wasn't aware that there was a modern twist where there was the kind of combination of traditional psychedelic art and meditation and mindfulness. Do you have any like artists off the top of your head that you can think of?
Yeah, if people want to check some of them out, there's a guy who's, I'm just gonna go off people's Instagram handles. There's a guy who's Kid with Visions on Instagram. His stuff's pretty cool. There's a guy named Clarence, who was spelled with a K, K-L-A-R-E-N-S. His stuff's really cool. There's an account called Still Life at still.life. Who else? Oh, Beaming Design. Those are just a few off the top of my head. And yeah, like whether it's like psychedelic focused or not, kind of like or more mental health and wellness focused kind of retreats. But just from my eye, at least, a lot of the motifs that are present in like 70s psychedelic art are being repurposed in like a modernized context in what these people are doing. Edreika, that's another one, Edreika. So yeah, if you want to check that stuff out. As for the more like 70s oriented ones, that are just doing like a modern spin on traditional psychedelic art, Kiriasin Design, which is, I don't even know if I'm going to spell that one right off the top of my head. Oh well. Sunkeep is another one. There's a few out there as well that are doing that kind of thing as well. So
I'll definitely check that out, because I wasn't aware of that kind of modern psychedelic art prior to this. But that's cool. I didn't realize that. And I guess, yeah, it makes sense to to explain that maybe the pandemic wasn't really an influence. These things were kind of naturally popping up on their own. It was just maybe that the pandemic expedited those things into people's onto people's devices and onto their screens, and maybe that's how it blew up.
Yeah. No, I definitely think that the pandemic could be considered like an expediter and an amplifier of a lot of that stuff for sure.
Okay. So you mentioned that psychedelic water isn't available here in Canada. Where's our main kind of page to find psychedelic water, and how can we get our hands on it if we're not already in the States?
Well, if you're not in the States, it's going to be a pain in the butt. I think there's like one Amazon reseller out there right now that's basically like buying our product from us and then like has some sort of import thing set up, but like they're charging like a bunch of money on top of what our sort of retail price is. So probably not worth it, to be honest, unless you want to pay like $90 or something. I forget what it was. It was ridiculous. But if you're in the States, check us out, hit up the store locator, find out if there's a store near you. If you got friends in the States, get them to order it for you. And then when you visit them, go pick it up, or get them to like send it to you. You got those options that way. But if you want to follow along and, see where be one of the first people to know when we come to Canada, because 100% when we launch in Canada, we're going to like be blasting that out there. Follow us online. We're at psychedelic_water on Instagram. We're at psychedelic water, no underscore on TikTok. We also have Twitter and Facebook. We're much less active there. And you can also go to our website to sign up for our email list, to kind of like know what's going on there as well. And that's psychedelicwater.com. So search psychedelic water and we'll come up. That's kind of where we all are. And yeah, for the Canadian people, I would say, just hit us up on social, follow along. And, as soon as we're available in Canada, you'll know. So.
All right. Thank you so much, Nate. Thank you for answering those questions and offering a little bit of your insight into psychedelic water. So thank you.
No worries.